The paper series follows up with the events of The Office as the documentary crew falls on over to Toledo, Ohio to cover the everyday lives of the people running this paper company. Hello and welcome, Cinema, where we focus on the film. I'm Josh, this is Simply Cinema. Let me know down in the comments below what you thought of the paper series. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? How do you think it compares to The Office Season 1, since we're setting up the debut for this show going forward, and taking it right in a positive? The paper was unironically much more lively than I would have expected. All the bitty jokes here and there just really had all the great puns, the wordplay, certain things that set up to be a lot more flavorful, a great cast that feels like it should be setting out to create big roles for them in movies or other shows going forward, because this show is already established to have a season 2, and that's where I feel there's the grounds for more jokes, for more flavors, for other things to come about from this show. The dynamic relationships are interesting to follow on throughout. What we get from Ned, what we get from all the girls, all the guys throughout this creates this lively environment within this paper company, having the same satire comedy that The Office gives off, but sort of having its own distinct flavor with all the characters, giving them their distinct personalities that goes about with different levels of where they stand within the company, their accountants, and bringing back Oscar Martinez from The Office show is a real nice treat. Speaking of The Office, there's nice Easter eggs here and there, something that Oscar brings about and he takes from what we got from the old Office show, as well as different things and mentions from that. It's not spread out all over the place, but that's what makes it feel like its own thing. It's not trying to forget The Office, but it's still reviving its own sense of energy, its own charisma along the way, that I feel is a good thing, that it's just standing on its toes too late, taking its own brisk time to go about, and even though there's rough patches here and there, it's expected to sort of have that running stride that will eventually get to the pace that The Office carried on. And while there isn't necessarily a full-on star player that is coming out of the show yet, what we still get out of it still has the great chemistry between the relationships that are shown on screen, between either the romantic partners or just the friendships that they gain along the way, is something great as we introduce this editor-in-chief played by Domhnall Gleeson, that I'm a really big fan of, and Tim Key is another new familiar face that I'm not aware of, that the way we follow about with him, with all these different cast members, with Esmeralda as this expertly expressive character on her own, is something that creates the contrast between all the different characters, having these distinct personalities, playing on different things, and having some jokes that actually work along the way. And they extended the runtimes from The Office, normally 22 to 24 minutes. This show is roughly 27 to 30 minutes each episode, which is fair in its own game. I don't feel like it's actually padded out, and having 10 episodes was worthy enough to feel like it offered enough while still wanting more once we're leading on to season 2, everything you're getting out of the show, because it's a loose game within the relationship of the storyline, and certain events happen at random in the general idea of what you expect out of the show. It still has great startup value as a season 1 of the show, getting us introduced with the cast really familiar on, and being able to introduce a few new characters sprinkled throughout the episode, giving them this short character runtime, but still managing to focus in on certain subplots of things that go about along the way that may not last throughout the whole season, but they still sustain the idea and what you're following through as if it is meant to be a documentary style thing. As it is, they're acknowledging the camera a lot more than what we got out of The Office, but because the ending seasons of The Office sort of broke that fourth wall a lot more. I understand that they aren't going to revamp the Office to style as if we aren't going to acknowledge that it is a documentary crew behind the whole thing. So there's just a general basis of the show that gets a good head start with what it's going for, maybe even better head start when the season 1 of The Office, and just gets the ball rolling with all these great jokes, these witty things that come about along the way. Which takes me into the mix-up, and of course, as a little bit of a comedy, if you aren't a fan of The Office, the way and texture of the jokes of the sitcom style, then you won't necessarily like this anymore. There is a little bit of a fresher, distinct style. It is going into a paper company rather than what was going on with The Office and everything regarding that, where you're expanding into toilet paper and every other type of paper that you can acknowledge. But the way you're following out about this isn't going deep into the rules of how a paper company works and everything. There's still some acknowledgement of running the newspaper and doing everything revolving around that, but it may get some ideas, certain functions of a paper company, how it's supposed to run, wrong in the sense that they may not have fully detailed it out in this specific way, because it still has to leave room for those jokes to flow through, for fun to be had, and to them for to break through on a road trip here and there along the way. So there could be inaccuracies depending on how heavily detailed you want this thing to be accurate, just depending on the type of thing you are heading into. If you're familiar with this type of environment, this is still just a liveliness that still it feels a little dry within some of its taste. Whether that is something you are heading in for and expecting, this is something that has the texture of the Office series, but sort of still in its own way. So certain jokes just won't always land 100%, and that's some of the things I took out of it. It's not a big problem for the show, for a big scheme of it, because ultimately I enjoyed this show more than I was still expecting. There's still, of course, those things that come about along the way, different small problems, different character developments that I'm not a huge fan of, but it's not a break for me to lose interest in this show as a whole. There's character developments that go in a certain route and sort of get resolved a little quickly, or not at all, because once it moves into the next episode, it's meant to be days later or an out of order sequence. So you're not just generally going to expect a deep and melancholic way of building up these characters resolving, because it's not the traditional way of exploring a story as a whole. Which takes me into the negatives. There's parts here and there that felt like it was trying a little bit too forcefully to add in some humor about barking dogs, but humans doing that favor, and things that is you have to suspend your disbelief to the workings of what these people in the paper company are led on to do, that falls onto a different sort of setup that feels just offbeat within the old thing, and just forced into behavior of what it's going about. And Esmeralda as a character, she's super expressive, super charismatic within what she's doing, can be very loud at certain times, and I am a fan of what they sort of attempt to do with her character, but she can be the annoying one out of the group. She has a little bit of the Michael Scott energy and that characteristic personality, but it's almost played down because since she's not the full front star of the show, she's not the full boss of the company, she's not put on the show all the time, giving all this dynamic energy that is constantly running throughout the show. So once you put her on her sort of subplot here and there, she can sometimes be, unfortunately, a little bit too annoying, a little bit on the nose, and put in some places that are uncomfortable and awkward. In otherwise, some other characters may have those awkward moments, but it's a little bit more sustainable because of the nature of how those characters are still built to be more likable, have the jokes, have a sense of calm, and pulling it into Esmeralda. Unfortunately, she is just one of those characters where I'm fine with what they're going for, but it also can be a little bit too much on the heavy side at some certain part. So that's just my personal thoughts on the paper, which I have to rate the whole series a simply 7.5 out of 10. Let me know down in the comments below what you think of the paper. Was it good? Was it bad? Or somewhere right in the middle? Or if you're now watching this review and going to decide if you're going to watch it or not, make sure to like this video if you enjoy it, subscribe if you haven't already to join in film culture community where we talk about the love cinema as a whole. So that's just all, and make sure to do yourself a favor and go watch a movie.